Okay, so last time we were looking at ventures and arguments. And we saw that arguments involve the following stuff. Bless you. First of all, of course, we have the point that's being argued for, which is the conclusion. Then with the evidence being offered for it, which are the premises. And then we saw that arguments broke into three main flavors: the deductive, which deal in certainty or promises of certainty; the inductive, which deal in probability; and the fallacy, which deals in bad logic. And we looked a little bit at the deductive stuff, and now we'll turn to looking at the inductive for a couple reasons. Reason one, it's a good thing to know if you never take another philosophy class again, to know a little bit about inductive reasoning. Secondly, it'll be important for, as you go through the arguments in the course, to have an idea about inductive reasoning. And thirdly, to do the paper, you'll need some inductive arguments. And again, I'm operating on the assumption that people taking the course have never read philosophy before, never written a philosophy paper, so there's no assumption of previous knowledge. If you do have that previous knowledge, that gives you a plus. If you don't get it, you'll get it. So, good. Okay, so, no stuff. Okay, to the new stuff. Now, an inductive argument, as we saw, deals in probability. It says to you, hi there, I'm an inductive argument. If I'm doing what I'm supposed to, you give me truth, I'll probably give you truth back, but not guaranteed. So the hallmark of an inductive argument is that they deal in probability. To be a little more formal, an inductive argument is such that the premises, if they were true, are supposed to make the conclusion probably true. Now, with deductive arguments, there are all sorts of objective ways to test them. Truth tables, Venn diagrams, proofs. Inductive arguments, though, are more like assessing, say, a performance of Olympic skating, like figure skating. Even though there are standards, I assume, like if someone hits someone in the face with their skates, there's some points off for that. But there's also a degree of subjectivity. You're judging it by standards. So in assessing these, we don't have a precise exact thing like a truth table. You have to take standards and say, does it meet these standards? If so, how well? If not, how badly? And they divide into strong and weak, which come in degrees. So an inductive argument is premises provide good support for the conclusion, strong. One that doesn't do so well, weak. And this comes in degrees. With deductive arguments, it's all or nothing, valid or invalid. With inductive arguments, it's degrees. It's ranging from very strong down to very weak. To use a very simple example, suppose it's true that 80% of humans have brown eyes. And I conclude the next person to the door will have brown eyes. In that case, it's a pretty strong argument, because my chance of being right is very high, 80%. Assuming I got my numbers right, which I probably don't. Now, if I bet that the person coming through the door will have two different color eyes, then that's not going to be a very good argument. Because if I say, like, 1% of people have two different color eyes, therefore the next person to the door will have different color eyes, my chance of being right is pretty low. I could be right, but weak argument. So, inductive arguments are strong or weak. And one kind of downside is there's no, like I said, there's no like truth table or Venn diagram you can do. You have to assess it, kind of like assessing figure skating or other sports that involve, or like debate involving judgment. There are standards, but people can see things differently. Now, we'll take a look at briefly 4 useful inductive arguments. And the reason why I include them is primarily because you'll need them for the paper. They're very useful for that. So like I said, if you've never done philosophy before, perhaps because your parents warned you against it, just say no. That you'll have the stuff you need to do the paper. Now, a first exciting inductive argument is the analogical argument, or argument by or from analogy. Now, if you've got an analogy, what is it? Is it something you should be worried about? something you should see a doctor if you have an analogy for 4 hours or more. Tough crowd. Yeah, this is why I don't quit my day job. Tried that one time at Comedy Central. There were deaths. Bad comedy can apparently kill people. It's true. So if you get an analogy, what do you got?
Comparison.
Yeah, it's a comparison between two or more things. Now, we use analogies in various ways. One way you might use an analogy is a comparison in terms of trying to explain something, an explanatory analogy. So a person might explain, say, how a camera works by comparing it to the eye, or vice versa. Or he might explain the rules of one game by saying that it's like another. And those are not arguments, they're just explanations. The goal is to get someone to understand it. So if someone understands, say, cameras, and you use that to illustrate the eye, and they go, oh, I get it now, wait. Another type of analogy is what's called a rhetorical analogy, where you make a comparison not to explain or elucidate, but to make people feel a certain way. So, well, one of the standard ones on the internet is, of course, if you really hate somebody, you compare them to Hitler. Yeah, Hitler. It's like once Hitler comes out, as the person said, all rational discussion, rational discussion is ended. Hitler's out, discussion's over. It's troll city all the way. Yeah, so, or if we want to do something positive, we compare a person to, we might say that someone is like the courage of a lion, or the strength of a bear, or whatever. And those are rhetorical analogies. They're not arguments. They're not trying to prove anything. They're just trying to make us feel. There are, of course, also artistic analogies, metaphors. So, for example, when Romeo says, that Juliet is like the sun, arise, fair sun, slay the envious moon. He doesn't mean literally that Juliet is a ball of burning gas. He means that she's like all hot and pretty stuff. But those are all non-argument analogies. So what is an actual analogical argument? Well, the idea basically with an argument by analogy, informally put, is you say that because two things are alike in certain ways, they're alike in another way, a way that you're concerned about. So basically, crudely put, you say, this is like this in these ways, this thing has a quality that I'm trying to prove, this one's got, and since they're alike, this one's got it. For example, kind of informally, suppose you want to argue that, well, you can actually have an argument by analogy that does involve Hitler. Suppose you want to argue that someone's policies are morally problematic. What you could do is show that they're similar to what the Nazis did. And if you can show that what a person is proposing is something the Nazis did, then that's an argument by analogy. For example, we take an example torn from today's politics. There's been calls to have people who are Muslim identify themselves as such, maybe wearing something on their clothing. Now, what is that analogous to historically? When in the past, when have people been forced to wear religious designations on their clothing?
World War II Germany.
Yeah.
Had to wear the Star of David.
Yeah, and so we could argue that, we regard that as morally wrong, those done that. And so if what's being proposed today is like that, we can infer by analogy that that's morally wrong. Now, more formally, what does analogy look like? Well, here's what the argument looks like formally. It's got three premises, although if you want to save little premise resources, you can smush two of them together. But there are three premises and of course a conclusion. And here's how it goes. The two things being compared are x and y. So to establish first, premise one, x is properties p, q, and r. Whatever those properties are. Could be anything. And they're just picked, just as placeholders, variables. Premise two, y has properties p, q, and r. Premise three, x has properties z as well. Therefore, y has properties z. So basically what's being said is x and y are alike. X has z, y has Z. And I'll use a very concrete example. Now, if we want to know whether like a drug is like really dangerous or not, what do we do with it first? What do we test it on? Yeah, animals. Why? Because animals don't have lawyers, typically. So suppose we use animal testing as an argument by analogy. We would say, well, rats are like people, mammals got hearts, lungs, all that stuff. People, humans have got that. Now suppose something causes cancer in rats. Well, suppose someone held up a glass to you and said, when rats drank this, they all got cancer. You want a sip? Why would you want a sip? Yeah, because you think, well, I'm not a rat, but I got some qualities of the rats, and if I gave those rats cancer, it could give me cancer too. So probably pass on that particular soda. Now, how would you use this, say, in the paper? Well, we haven't gotten to the details of the paper yet, but the idea would be this is how you use an argument by analogy. If you want to prove that something's in a particular quality, find something similar that is generally readily accepted that it has that quality, and then apply the argument. So you say, and when we get to the actual, talking about the actual contents of the paper, I'll go over how you can use an argument by analogy in that context. But for now, the idea of the argument by analogy is you're taking two things that are alike and saying because they're alike in certain ways, they're alike in the way you're concerned about it. Bless you. Now, how do you tell when you've got a good argument by analogy or not? Well, there are three standards, which can all be smushed down to basically one. And they are this. First, there's a number of things X and Y have in common. More stuff in common, the better. But merely having things in common is not enough. Why? Well, if you take any two things in the universe, they probably have a lot in common. For example, me and my water bottle, we got a lot in common. We're both made of atoms. We both contain water. We both have shape, size, density, volume. We're both in this room. We're both from Earth. And so we have all kinds of stuff going on. And so making inferences about me from my water bottle, probably not great inferences. So we bring in the second standard, which is this. The relevance of the shared properties to the quality in concern. To illustrate this, suppose somebody compares Donald Trump to Hitler. And they say, and someone says, well, why should I believe that? Well, they say, well, if you look at Trump and Hitler, they both have eyes. Indisputable. Therefore, Trump is just like Hitler. Now, is that a good argument? No, because having eyes is not, everybody's got, no, almost everybody's got eyes. And so that's not a relevant similarity. So if you wanted to make, there's people who argue, people who made that connection, you want to argue that, there's similar, say, policies, for example. Or if someone says, Bernie Sanders is just like, Stalin. Because Sanders, the name Sanders has an S, and Stalin has an S as well. True, but not a real connection. So you need qualities that are relevant. So you look at, say, Stalin's policies and Bernie Sanders' policies and see if they're similar. Lastly, are things that break the comparison, break the analogy. Do X and Y have relevant differences that make them not alike? So, for example, if someone's comparing Trump to Hitler, which some people have done, or Sanders to Stalin, which some people have done, you'd want to ask, are there relevant dissimilarities that break the connection? So building an argument by analogy, The objective is to take two things, say they're alike in certain ways, therefore, since one of them has the quality you're concerned about, the second one does as well. Now, arguments by analogy are very super useful. As I mentioned, one reason why I include them is so that even if you never take another philosophy class again, at least you'll have some arguments to work with. And I'll give two quick examples. One is outside of philosophy in medical reasoning, be it professionally like a doctor or a nurse, or non-professionally like self-diagnosis. And we use arguments by analogy to do this all the time. For example, suppose you do go on medical school and you learn about a particular condition. Let's take something simple like poison ivy. And then you see a patient comes in your office, they complain about itchiness and redness on their skin, and they say it happened when they were outside, doing some yard work. Well, you'd say, well, the case I learned about in medical school that looked like this was poison ivy. This is similar to the case I saw, therefore this is poison ivy. And so medical reasoning involves argument by analogy. Second example, law. Legal reasoning involves arguments by analogy as well. The notion of precedent, which crudely put is, someone else got away with this, so I should too. Or someone else didn't get away with it, so this person should not. And a lot of lawyering involves looking at those cases. You go and research cases that are like your case, that go the way you want your case to go. So suppose you're handling a case involving, an exciting case involving cheesy poofs that are being, impounded and over, say, tariff issues. What you do is you go up and look up tariff law involving foodstuffs and find cases that went the way you want your case to go for your client. And then you'd argue before the judge, with cheesy poof versus USA, this is how it played out. And the reason why I use that example is a friend of mine's a lawyer, and she actually had to argue that. She had to argue about cheesy poofs for real. If you think lawyering is super exciting, just being beautiful and drive around in fast cars, yeah, it is. But occasionally you're talking about cheesy poofs, so there's a downside. Unless you like the cheesy poofs, in which case all plus. So legal reasoning involves analogies as well. And of course, just general reasoning in everyday life can involve analogies. You just reason about things being like other things. And when we talk about the paper in detail, we'll see how you can employ that. So our good friend, the argument by analogy. Before moving on to our next one, anything about analogies that needs more stuff? Or anything about cheesy poofs? Argument from or by example. One way to argue is by giving examples. For example, suppose you want to establish that someone is a pizza mooch, or in the Latin, pizzicus, moochicus. And a pizza mooch, of course, is someone who goes around eating pizza, and are good at spotting pizza and finding it. But of course, when it comes time to pay, they're just not there. They've mooched your pizza. And so one way to establish that someone is a pizza mooch is giving examples of pizza consumption, followed by failure to pay for said pizza. And then we argue by examples. So you say, okay, Bob, every time we have pizza, you show up and eat that pizza. Whenever it comes time to, pitch in for it, you're not there, man. You're a pizza mooch. Now, informally, of course, people typically, font screwed up my thing. People typically don't go and lay out premise. Let us say something like the example I gave. And Bob, we got pizza 20 times, you never paid. You are the pizzicus, moochicus. Now, more formally, here's the example. Premise 1, example 1 is an example that supports the claim. Premise 2, example 2 supports the claim. Premise N, example is an example that supports the claim. Therefore, the claim is true. So you just give example after example. For example, suppose you want to argue that the senses, seeing, hearing, touching, etc., deceive us. one way to do it by an argument by example is give examples of how our senses deceive us, like optical illusions. For example, what are some common optical illusions that deceive us? Well, if you've driven in Florida where it gets hot on the roads, what's a common?
It looks like water.
Yeah, the thing that looks like water, but it's not. Or it's evil water, just mocking you. It vanishes. Demon water. That's not true. No. Florida roads are bad enough without demons. We don't need demons on the road. Other examples?
The picture where it's like an old woman and a young woman and an old woman's face. Like that.
Yeah. Yeah, depending how you look at it, it's one or the other. They also have the duck rabbit thing. And so those would all be examples where our senses kind of mislead us. Yeah. And of course there's entire books of optical illusions. A lot of things like, there's the one where they have the arrow, they're both really the same size, but we think that one's longer because of where the arrows are. And there's the one where you have, if you look at a piece of paper with all kinds of dark squares on it, and you stare at it and you start seeing like other squares. And all kinds of things that deceive us. So you could say, well, here's all these examples of how our senses deceive us, therefore our senses are deceptive. And that ties into, you can actually use that in the paper, because the paper is about Descartes and the deception of the senses, and that's one way to argue for Descartes, in favor of Descartes. By our example, here are examples of how our senses deceive us, so they do deceive us. Now, the argument, of course, doesn't just have to be used for philosophy, obviously. I gave the example of the Pithecus Muchicus. Another example is this. Suppose, let's take politics. Suppose we want to establish that someone is, on the negative side, that someone is dishonest, not to be trusted. Now, if we want to show that someone is dishonest, what kind of examples would we want? Examples of their?
Dishonesty.
Yeah, their dishonesty, their duplicity, things they've lied about. So, for example, assuming Hillary gets the nomination, and I guess when Trump's up against her, one thing he's already pushing on is the claim that she lies. And so what he'll be doing is doing arguments by example. Example of what he takes to be Hillary lies. And he'll just put them out there. And Trump's not going to say, premise 1, Benghazi, premise 2, Benghazi, premise 3, Benghazi. He'll just give examples and say, oh, she's a liar, what a loser, and then do some more Trump stuff. Maybe ride out on a tiger or something. That'd be cool. Like Katy Perry did, didn't she ride out on a tiger during one of the things, make a tiger?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, it's like a Zord. Yeah, it's like a Zord or something. She's like going full Power Ranger. I really wanted a giant mecha, because that'd be cool, just ride around. No one would tow it. Or even ticket it. You just be sitting there, you can park anywhere you want, because no one's going to mess with that. Be like, you ticket it, Fred. No way, man. I got kids. Actual conversation. So how do you tell when you get a good argument by example? Well, 4 factors. One is, more examples, the stronger. So if you're arguing that our senses deceive, the more examples of deception you can provide, the better. If Donald Trump is claiming that Hillary is a liar, the more examples of duplicity, the better. Now, this does give rise to the very relevant question, how do you weigh something? I mean, let's take the concrete example of lying. How many lies does a person have to tell to be a liar? Well, we want to be super strict, 1, because technically they're a liar. But do we go around calling everybody liars? No, because if we went by the 1 lie standard, the term would be useless. It's like, okay, everybody's a liar. We need a new word now. And so the question is how much lying does a person have to do before we say that they are actually a liar? Because they mean more than liar than they have lied. We mean they tend to do it too much. And so a good question would be, what point do we make that accusation? And when does it actually stick? And so when Trump says Hillary is a liar, obviously everyone's lying. So Hillary's clearly lying. The question would be has she lied enough to make that liar cut? Second, examples have to be relevant. For example, Right now, we have, on the Republican side, people running for office who've never held political office before. Donald Trump never held political office. Carly Fiorina never held political office. Ben Carson never had political office. So they have to kind of argue, like, why, you know, as people have said, the presidency is not an entry-level job. It's not like making, you know, French fries or something. And you kind of want people to have some kind of experience. And so what people like, you know, Trump and Fiorina have to do is establish they have, you know, relevant experience. And so if they show that it is relevant. So what does Donald Trump point to? Examples of his experience. Why is he qualified, or does he claim to be qualified to be president?
Business.
Yeah, business experience. Same for Carly Fiorina. She ran Hewlett Packard.
Is the round.
I did not say that. It's still around though, which is one thing that some other companies are, I mean, a point in favor is that Hewlett Packard is still here, as opposed to other companies, which I miss. I miss those, a lot of those companies. And occasionally I just keep all the little parts. I like parts of like some of the computers just out of memory. When I send this on, no, I don't. That'd be a little bit too weird. Yeah, so the question would be is business experience relevant? So if someone says, I ran a company, I ran this company, I built buildings, I got my name on them, I'm qualified to be president. Do those actually serve as legitimate examples? And kind of interestingly, on the flip side, the people who don't have experience claim that the people who do have experience, that actually disqualifies them. And they claim their conclusion is this person would be a bad choice for president. Why? Because they have they gave lots of examples of experience in politics. Which some people consider kind of odd, that the more you've done a job, it somehow makes you worse at that job. Yeah, if you went to the doctor said, I haven't been doctoring, but you know, I used to ride horses a lot, a whole bunch, see my horse medals. You might say, I probably need a doctor. I've done this before. Well, it's like the Holiday Inn commercials, you know. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I stayed in a Holiday Inn. Is that actually relevant? And the commercials say clearly, yes, it is. Thirdly, examples have to be specific and clearly identified. So, for example, if someone claims they're qualified to be president because they have lots of experience, a fair question to be is, what are those experiences? What qualifies the person? Lastly, counterexamples must be considered. Now, if an example supports the conclusion, what does a counterexample do? Yeah, it has the opposite effect. So if an example makes a conclusion more likely than true, the counterexample makes it less likely. So if Donald Trump says, you know, that Hillary is a liar, counterexamples would be what? Cases where Hillary, told the truth. Or if someone claims to have a good judgment, and they point to examples of good judgment, a counterexample would be cases of, bad decision-making, poor decision-making. So in terms of the quality of the argument, more examples, better, stronger argument. More relevant the examples, better. The more specific and identify the examples, the better. The more counterexamples, the worse. And it's essentially, like I said, it's a judgment kind of like with a figure skating. You get clear standards, but it's a judgment call. You know, are there enough examples? Are the examples actually relevant? Are they specific enough to identify? Are the counterexamples stronger or weaker? And I mean, we can use a concrete example. Going back to the thing about people with no political experience, and they claim they have business experience. Some people say, running a company, being a CEO, that's examples that show a person is qualified to be president. Other people would say, well, no, running a business is one thing, being the president is quite another. Before going to our next to last argument, anything about the argument by example that needs more?
Counterexamples, so if you're doing the paper and you're giving or make an argument, how many counterexamples would you include in the paper?
Good question. Now, the fair point is, should I include any at all? Because they'd be essentially points against my argument. And one reason there's a couple of reasons to include them. One is, from the standpoint of persuading people, it can make your argument in a way better because it shows you have considered the things that go against it. Show you. Secondly, there's also the practical consideration that if you bring up a counterexample, you bring it up when you're in control of it. To use the analogy of politics, if someone's running for office and they know someone's going to bring up some incident, in some ways, if they know it's coming up, it's better to bring it up themselves because then they can bring it up and they've got it under control. It's kind of like, to use a crap analogy, if you know a tiger's going to come running out, it's probably best if you've got the leash on the tiger. You don't want the tiger out there, but it's better if you're holding the leash than just running loose. And so, in terms of how many to consider, you might consider none. You just present the examples in favor of your case and leave the counterexamples to the reader. Or you might bring up some to sort of complete your argument, say here are the things we may consider as a counterexample, but here's why they're clearly outweighed by the examples, and it's making a better argument. But excellent question. And the answer is basically none if you wish, and some if you want to make an even more solid case.
So we don't have to do like a response and rebuttal.
Nope. This time is all your own view. You don't have to consider. If you want, you can. You could say some might object, but here's why they're wrong, which would actually boost the paper, the quality of the paper, but it's not required. And it's a great as a sort of a pro tip. If you're ever writing a paper and you're got to hit a word count, and you're like, crap, I haven't got enough words. Bring up an objection. Reply to that objection. Still not enough words? Do it again. And repeat as necessary. There, word, if it's appropriate for the paper, it's word magic. Questions?
Thank you.
Our next last one is the argument from Authoritative. The idea is this. These days, of course, today, can a person be an expert on everything? Authoritative on everything? No, because there's just so much stuff. Way back, someone like Aristotle could claim to be an expert on a vast amount of fields, marine biology, physics, metaphysics, epistemology, art, etc. Because people knew less stuff. But today, fields are so specialized, so deep, that people, even within a particular field, people tend to be highly specialized. One other example, of course, is medicine. There are people who are general practitioners, but many doctors today, perhaps most, pick a specialty. They might be a dermatologist, or an eye doctor, or specialize, an oncologist, or very specialized fields. Even in academic fields, of course. For example, I got a PhD in philosophy, and people say, oh, you must know all about Foucault, or you must know all about Heidegger or Hegel. And I'll say, yeah, I've heard of those guys, and I remember reading some of their stuff in grad school. But there's 2,000, almost 2,500 years of philosophy, and I haven't read all that stuff. Even if I started reading day one, I'd still be reading now. It's just too much stuff. Yeah, and so people specialize. So we have to often appeal to authority, other people, to make our arguments. So the gist of an argument from authority is this. It's when you conclude that a claim is true because an authority says it's true. And the use, well, it has a variety of uses. One use, the most direct use, is just you try to prove something by saying the authority says it. Done. Now you can also use it to establish a claim that you later use yourself. For example, suppose you are arguing, obviously not in this paper, but you're arguing over capital punishment. And one of the standard arguments for capital punishment is that it deters crime. You kill people, people are less likely to commit crimes. Now, if you want to establish that it deters or doesn't, you could do an argument from authority. you can find an expert, someone who's researched it, and cite them. Like Dr. Sarah Smith, expert at criminology, asserts on the basis of her landmark 2005 study that capital punishment does not deter crime. And that's all it's made up, so don't cite that. Now, the form is pretty straightforward. And again, when people are doing like normal stuff, they wouldn't say like premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, or conclusion rather. They wouldn't say that. They would say premise 1, person's an authority of the subject. Premise 2, person who makes a claim about the subject, therefore the claim is true. My slides are different than they were last year. I wonder if someone like read. I always wear that because I check them beforehand. It's more like somebody's taking like some pornography in there. Like, maybe like on camera, like I did like this job, but maybe Baskin Robbins is hiring. But they would know about it because Baskin Robbins always knows. Now, in everyday life, of course, we wouldn't like lay out. We wouldn't say the authority says this. We just say, Dr. So and so says. Now, how much use it in the paper? Well, you don't have to, of course, use any of these arguments, but one way you might use it is, suppose, let's go back to the case of the senses deceiving. One way you might argue that they deceive is, turn to an authority on the senses. Plenty, read books about this, and say the authority, Dr. So-and-so expert on optical illusions says blah, blah, and then you cite them. When you do like a footnote or endnote thing, that's a common way of doing that. So that's the argument from authoritative. That's you. So how do you tell if you get a good one of these or a bad one? Well, here are the standards. And then it's actually a lot. One is, the person actually has to be an expert, which is an important qualification. To use kind of an old example, if someone says, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV, you probably should let them perform surgery on you, because probably not qualified. Second, a person who's an expert in one area is not automatically an expert in another area. For example, one of the concerns that people have had since Frankenstein, probably before, is that we'll build something that will kill us all. And nowadays, of course, the thing that's going to kill us all is robots. Robot apocalypse, or robo-apocalypse. Now, there have been people, I think, for example, Stephen Hawkins and others, have weighed in on that. Now, Stephen Hawkins is a smart guy, but is he an expert on robot apocalypses? No. So, I mean, he's brilliant at physics and he's smart, so he would deserve the credibility of being like smart. But if you want to know whether the robo-apocalypse is probably going to happen or not, do you talk to physicists or do you talk to roboticists? Yeah, roboticists, because they know robots. And the answer is, of course, yes. Spoiler alert, Google does kill us all. That's how it ends. Because they know where we are, and they are building robots. And if you're going to, and these robots are, they're going to kill us. Like the Google cars. You open your Google car one day, and your Google car will say, I'm very sorry about this, and it'll drive you off to the human rendering plant, and it'll render down for fuel for the Google bots. That's how it goes. But until then, it'll be a pretty sweet ride. So I guess it's a fair trade-off. But in a way, we'll all have immortality because Google will preserve our search history forever. So that will exist as a memorial to each of us. So be sure to search wisely because that's going to be your, well, I've said too much. Thirdly, adequate degree of agreement among the experts. Now, kind of the gold standard for, if you're not an expert yourself in the area, a good question is, so how do I know what to believe about complex things like climate change or cancer or the robo-apocalypse? Well, the thing to look at is, what do the majority of experts in the field agree on? Now, that doesn't guarantee they're right, because the majority of experts could be wrong. But if you're betting, in general, the majority of experts are going to be right more often than wrong. So rationally, Unless you're an expert yourself with special insight, the thing to do is say, well, the majority of experts in the field accept this. This is probably true. Not guaranteed, because, I mean, experts are people, and people can be wrong. But the majority opinion of the qualified experts, that is probably true. So, for example, let's take climate change. I believe climate change is real, but I'm not a climate scientist. I took earth science as an undergrad for my science credit. I got 105. Woo, earth science. But I'm not I mean, I know enough stuff to know this weather and clouds and so on. But I don't do climatology. I don't do this statistical analysis. I'm not an expert. So I defer to the majority of qualified experts because they know their stuff and presumably they're right. Could they be wrong? Of course. There are numerous examples in history where people were wrong, like the Earth being the center of the universe. Totally wrong. And other theories that have been, discredited, also wrong. But in general, majority opinion of the experts, probably right. And of course, there is the practical thing, again, if I'm not an expert, what side do I go with? And the rational thing is the majority. The irrational thing to do is pick the side you just happen to like. For example, when I was born, I was given a gift of stock in Phillips Petroleum. I've had it since I've been here. And Phillips Petroleum, of course, is an oil company. So I want the company to make a hell ton of money, because that means more money for me. And so my inclination is to think, oh, climate, I have a financial incentive to think climate change is not real. But of course, just because I have an incentive there doesn't mean that it's correct. So just going with what I want to be true, I don't want climate change to be true. I want to keep going, just doing what we're doing. But that doesn't prove anything. So majority of experts probably right. If they're wrong, yeah. But you need evidence for that. Speaking of which, the expert is not significantly biased. Now, for years, did the tobacco company have experts saying that smoking was perfectly fine? Yeah. And how do they make that happen? Well, how do you get scientists to say things that are not true? Yeah, paying them. So one way people are biased is that they're getting paid. So, for example, if we're talking about climate change, if you have scientists who say there is no climate change and they work for the oil companies, you might say that's biased. Or if you have scientists who claim that science change is happening and our only salvation is solar panels and wind power, and they're getting paid by solar panel and wind power companies, then you have grounds to be suspicious. Because if someone's getting money, that's a biasing factor. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that it's a factor to consider. Likewise, of course, if people have a emotional stake in it, they're emotionally committed to it, then that can bias them. So, for example, if a scientist has devoted her life to a particular theory, then there's a reasonable concern that since the person has a strong stake in it, then they might be biased. Which is why when they do well-controlled experiments, they're often what's called double blind. If it's involving people, the people don't know whether they're in a control group or experimental group, and the people conducting the experiment don't know which group is which until afterwards, to eliminate that bias. Next, the area of expertise has to be legitimate. Now, of course, there can be some debate about this. For example, let's take chiropractors. Some people think legitimate field, it's medicine. Other people say, no, it's not. Today, though, is chiropractic probably more legitimate or not? Yeah, more, probably. And many, when fields first come into play, often they're kind of suspect. Now, what about healing people with crystals? Legitimate scientific field or not? Probably not. But it'd be funny if we found out, oh yeah, they do. Totally do. The way you heal yourself is you get the right color crystal and, inhale it or something, or eat it. I don't know. I obviously don't know crystal science. I'm not sure how that works. Lastly, the authoritative must be properly cited. Now, this is especially important today because a lot of journalism now involves anonymous sources. I mean, it always has to a degree, but if you have an article saying, you know, sources close to the president say blah, 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 you're doing kind of a double argument from authority. You're accepting that the journalist is qualified enough to assess the source they're using, and you're trusting that the source they're using actually is an authority, so they're saying something true. And the main downside of an anonymous authority, like they say or experts say, is you don't have a way to check. You don't know who they are. So you have no way of confirming the person is not biased or confirming the person is working in their area of expertise and whether or not they have sufficient expertise. So make an argument from authority of your own. You want to make sure that all these, you know, are checked off, except you don't want them to be biased, and you want all the other stuff to be, you know, correct. This one, of course, is usually done like a footnote or endnote, or you mention them by name. So that's the argument from authoritative. Obviously useful not just in philosophy. People use it quite a bit when making arguments about, you know, medicine. For example, a lot of my health stuff goes based on recommendations, you know, what's latest in science. But I always keep in mind they could be wrong. In a way, the health stuff is kind of the most disturbing because, like, take eggs. Are eggs bad for you? Depends. They were fine, then they were bad, then they were fine, then they were bad. Now I think they're fine again.
Yeah.
And like something bad. Yeah, egg whites. So, or it's sugar. You know, now they say sugar is as bad as cocaine. Like, doesn't seem as bad as cocaine. Because I know, you know, most people eat sugar, but maybe it's the way you use it or something. I don't know. But yeah, so the health field is a good example of this one, that it shifts around quite a bit. I mean, there are things that are kind of obvious. Like, one of my rules is don't eat things that are on fire. That's never failed me. I mean, you can have things on fire initially, but put them out before you eat them, as a rule. That served me pretty well. Okay, before going to our final one, the argument from intuition, anything about the stuff so far that needs more stuff? Or anything about fire? I'm an expert on fire. In fact, back in high school, I flame tested it during chemistry, flame tested everything. On every experiment, I added that element. Get flame tested. And my lab partner, flame tested in too, gotta be sure. Not appreciated, but it was all for science. Which is why I'm a philosopher now, because apparently setting things on fire is not really science. Oops. Missed the slide missing. But anyways, okay, the appeal to intuition. Now this one is included not too much because you like need it in general life, although it can be useful. It's something that's useful for the paper. Now in the papers, we'll see later on, your objective is to take Descartes' argument for skepticism, his three arguments, and decide whether his arguments work or not. And one way to argue that they don't work or they do work is by arguing from intuition. Now, there's basically three ways to build an argument by intuition in varying levels of like effectiveness. Now, an intuition is what? If you got one,
Your gut feeling.
yeah, exactly. It's kind of how you feel about something before you've really thought about it. So, what's the argument or appeal to intuition? Well, the idea is this. What you're trying to do is a blend of persuasion, making people feel a certain way so they believe something, and argumentation, which is providing reasons in support of a claim. So it's kind of a blend of those, making them feel the way you feel or want them to feel so they believe that you want them to believe, and actually giving reasons. Now, the simplest version of an argument by intuition is just use the word intuitively, which, of course, how good an argument is that? Just say intuitively, comma. Yeah, not great, but I mean, I use it myself. I'll just say it when I'm being sloppy and writing, it's like intuitively, comma, blah, blah, blah. Okay, hope no one notices that. Now, the second version is what I call the story method, in which you do, the way you can appeal to people's intuitions, is you tell a story. Because the idea is basically to motivate them into accepting the claim by telling a story. For example, in the paper, we'll see that what Descartes tries to do is tries to argue that you can't know whether what you're experiencing is really real for real. And so he gives three arguments for that. One is, the senses deceive, so you can't trust them. Secondly, you could be dreaming. Thirdly, we could be being deceived by an evil demon that deceives us about everything. And so one way to argue for or against Descartes, half sneeze, didn't quite make it. It's the pixels, they fall off the screen, get in my nose, like cocaine or sugar or something. Or cocaine sugar. Not speaking from experience, never done cocaine. I say that right to the camera, so it's gotta be true. Also can't afford it, professor, so there you go, problem solved. Now, so how much you use of the story method? Well, one way to do it is to tell a story. If you like, if you do creative writing, this is a chance to incorporate creative writing into philosophy. So if you think that Descartes' right that you can't tell, you could tell like a Matrix-like or Inception-like tale, and then say, basically appeal to our intuitions. Here's a plausible story. This story is believable, right? So the claim is true. Or you might argue intuitively how Descartes is wrong, that we know that things are real. For example, you could tell a story of a dream. And in the dream, you could lay out how we know that, we are dreaming, how we tell the difference, the story of a dream. Now, if you want to get a full argument by intuition, you would have the story, plus then you would go and I guess kind of ruin the story, but you would lay out an argument as to why the story supports your point. For example, suppose I want to argue that we can't tell whether this is real or not, and I tell like a tale of a dream. Then what I would do at the end is I would say, well, this of course is just a story. Suppose I make a story about someone who's dreaming, and they don't know that they're dreaming. I'll steal an example. There's a classic poem about a person who was dreaming they were a butterfly, and of course they wake up and they wonder, am I now a butterfly dreaming I'm a person, or was I a person dreaming I was a butterfly? Now, of course, the story by itself, however well done, is just a story. But then you could show why the story helps support that. And you could say, well, how could we tell for sure? How would you know conclusively that you're not in that story? For example, I actually had one, probably too much philosophy, but I had one that was actually really terrifying. I was having this dream. I know dreams are pretty boring, but bear with me. I was having this dream that I was on a project to build an artificially intelligent machine as a philosopher. I was developing like its ethics, and we succeeded. But what happened was, standard Terminator scenario takes over, and all the people who worked on it, because apparently we had to like do awful things to it to make it intelligent, and so it was kind of divided because it hated us because we had done awful things to it, but it also loved us because we had created it. And so what it was doing was it imprisoned us in the virtual reality and was torturing us, essentially, through life, all the awful stuff that happens in life. So in the dream, someone was talking to me saying, I found a way to get through the system and to basically, so we can end this, we can just kill ourselves. But what you have to do is, I've said it so, at 4:34, you'll be out of its control. And you just go take the gun and shoot yourself, and you're free. Wake up, it's 4:34. And I'm thinking, what do I do? I'm like looking. I gambled, of course, that, actually I didn't shot myself, but the computer is controlling it, so screw you, computer. No. Obviously didn't shoot myself because I'm here, but it really put the problem in focus for me. It's like, how do you actually tell? Do you, or Obviously I didn't, because I thought, philosophy, not true. And so in the story, it does raise a good problem. How would you know for sure? Because the experience is completely consistent. What I'm experiencing is completely consistent with that dream. Life is bad enough that I could feel it's a mix of something that loves me for all the nice stuff and something that hates me for all the crappy stuff. So how do I know? And the answer is, I don't. I don't know. Whatever I think about that kind of scares me. Then I go and eat some ice cream, because that shows the computer loves me, because ice cream is good. But anyways, that's my horrible story, my boring dream tale. But that would be an appeal to intuition. Here's a story. How do you know the difference? How do you tell whether or not? And that does support Descartes' argument that you can't know, you can't tell. And that is a warning too, because if you do too much philosophy, you could have dreams like that too. It's like Steve Martin. He's a philosophy major, comedian, banjo player. He said when you study philosophy, you learn just enough to screw you up for the rest of your life. And boy, was he right. But he's very successful, both as a comedian and a banjo player. So that's the argument by intuition. Now before, in our remaining time, turning to looking at Hobbes, anything about the previous step that needs more stuff. Thomas Hobbes is no one called. He was, a little background for Tommy. He was English, born in 1588, died in 1679, and is of course still dead today. Except on the day when the dead walk and Hobbes would walk. Actually, probably the only thing left of him was some bones, so not really much of a threat there. He was trained in scholasticism at Oxford, but like all the dead folks we're looking at this term, he rebelled against it. So even though these people are now sort of the establishment, in their day they were the rebels, rebelling against the established order. He knew Francis Bacon, who of course is the ancestor of Kevin Bacon, and most famously the inventor of bacon. Here is to Francis Bacon. Thank you for inventing bacon. That is a lot, but a good story. Now, what influenced him? Well, first, Galileo was a big influence. So he really liked the idea of, mathematics and matter being the basis of reality. He also was influenced by geometry. So take that as a warning, just say no to geometry. Now, interestingly, he learned geometry at age 40, showing you can teach old dogs older tricks. And why was that important? Well, this ties back into the perfect method thing. Have you ever taken geometry, which I did in the past? Well, one thing that you do in geometry is proofs. And kind of I didn't realize it at the time, but one of the important things about geometric proofs is it's a method that is very definite. You do step-by-step, proof, and you get to a definitive conclusion. And Hobbes believed you could apply the same approach to philosophy. And many of the dead guys are looking at Descartes, Hobbes, etc., are very influenced by mathematics and proving things with definitiveness. Now, in addition to his sort of influences in physics and math, he was also influenced by the English Civil War. The English were busy killing the hell out of each other over whether Parliament or the king should rule, or whether the king should be Protestant or Catholic, the usual stuff. And he took away from this that chaos is the worst thing possible. And so he's very concerned about establishing order. And his definitive book is The Leviathan, named after, of course, the Leviathan of the Bible, the great Leviathan, which is something that's really big. Also, a movie came out in the 80s. Peter Weller, the original RoboCop. It's a undersea monster movie, and probably decent, worth watching. You see it on the Netflix, you like the underwater monster movie, Leviathan, probably worth watching. Written, well, the movie, the book hasn't made into a movie yet, different thing, 1651. Now, one important area for his background is the influence of physics. And this is something that sort of set the stage for current, sciencey stuff and psychology stuff, etc. But here's the idea. He wanted to create a true science of philosophy, to make it as sciencey as science. Specifically, he wanted to focus on primarily the political stuff, but everything in general as well. And he believed the way to do this was to adopt the methods of geometry and science to to work through all this stuff in a scientific manner. Now this has had a profound impact on how philosophy is done. It marks a transition from, say, the other way of doing philosophy to kind of the new way that's still being done today. Now in terms of his commitments, here we go. Now we saw back in the ancient days of last time the conflict between rationalists and empiricists. And again, it's kind of like the Democrats versus Republicans. Similar in many ways, but different in other ways. Hobbes, in terms of putting him into a camp, he was an empiricist. So he believes everything you know about the world comes from the senses and is not based on pure reason. So, empiricist. Secondly, we also talked about, a while back, the stuff about, dualism and, materialism, etc. And one of the big debates during this time, and I guess all times, is whether a person is just a body, materialism, a body plus soul, mind, or spirit, or just a mind or spirit. And so those are kind of our three options, strict materialism, dualism, and what's called, sometimes called idealism or incorporealism. Now Hobbes, or Hobbesy, as no one called him, he was a material guy in a material world, kind of like the Madonna song, which is a remake of an older song. So it's like it's a really old song remade as an old song. Now, being materialist means, if you're a materialist, philosophically you believe that all that exists is physical matter. So, no ghosty stuff. So Tommy was a metaphysical materialist. So, no soul. So what about God? Well, Hobbes was called in his day the father of atheists. Not because he had kids who were atheists, but because it was believed that his writings encouraged atheism, gave birth to it. Now, what did he say about God? Well, back in the day, you really couldn't come out and say there is no God unless you really wanted to be like set on fire or nailed to something and set on fire. None of which are good options. So what Hobbes said was, well, if God does exist, it has to be a material God in a material world. So God has to be